I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's TGU time. Welcome to VLGA Connect with the weekly panel discussion brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. I'm joined this week by Julie Reid and Tony Rownick from some exotic locations. More on that in just a moment. But what are we going to be chatting about today? Well, the Greater Geelong Council CEO, Ali Wastie, has been in court making a stand on gendered abuse. We've got some CEO announcements this week in regional parts of Australia. The municipal monitors at Moonee Valley have had an extension to their term. A council meeting recording edited for potentially legal reasons, and a CEO defends the action that's been taken there. And we've had a ministerial response to a call for a monitor out at Northern Grampians. That's just some of what we have to catch up on this week. Julie Reid, I'll say hello to you first. You're in where is it? The centre of a very exotic location called Melbourne.
Yes, that's right. I'm in
Yes,
the centre of the universe, Chris.
Good to see you, and welcome back. And Tony Rownick, where are you? Tony's in his car. For those of you watching on YouTube, we've caught you between engagements?
Yes, it's the spacious mobile VLGA studio, everyone, and
Yes.
I'm in Trawool at Trawool Estate, which is beautiful Mitchell Shire, just near Yea and Seymour, for the Rural Council Victoria Forum, which is partway through, and great session for rural councillors, CEOs, and directors from across the state gathering in beautiful Mitchell Shire.
Fabulous. So you can see how much of a budget we have for this program, folks, by Tony's mobile studio. Back in my TV days, we would have called that an outside broadcast van, Tony, the AV van. All right. So great that you could join us anyway and catch up with us on the week's news. I want to start with the court appearance this week by the CEO of Greater Geelong, Ali Wastie, on behalf of herself and two female officers who'd been subjected to some pretty abhorrent messages, and abhorrent was the word used in court, from a property owner there. There's been lots of attention on this from local press and on LinkedIn, with people generally applauding Ali for making a stand here. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, and it was great to see that she did make a stand on this. This was in response to, obviously, a man who was upset with the council around an urban design framework that was being developed, and there were messages coming from him direct to the CEO and to other members of staff, and she said enough is enough, and took him on. They, in the end, I believe, Chris, they negotiated out a resolution around it in terms of, I think he's agreed that it was probably not such a good thing to do, and that he will refrain from sending those kind of abusive messages across to council staff in the future, and particularly, got the message around the fact that they were, he was targeting females. So it was very, very inappropriate behaviour, and it's good that Ali has taken a stand on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen the messages, but I've spoken to a couple of people who have, and it's pretty vile stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be honest, I don't know whether I'm alone here. A little bit disappointed in the soft outcome here, but I guess courts seem to try to want a brokered solution to these issues more often than not, Tony.
Yeah, they call them personal safety intervention orders now. Used to be called IVOs, and courts are generally very reluctant to take people's liberties away in terms of their rights to be in particular geographic areas or communicating with people, unless it's a genuine concern of violence. But I think you're right here. Appalling behaviour. Never ever appropriate, and unfortunately, I think we see more of this, in public affairs these days, where people just doing their job. In this case, some officers doing their job in a strategic planning sense, copying it. I understand some councillors as well copped it from this gentleman as well. So, well, and I use that word very loosely. I said gentleman, this person, and look, kudos to Ali Wastie for taking a stand here, and the more of us that do that, I mean, we shine a light on this, perhaps it will occur less. That's the hope, anyway.
It's a shame that you've got to go to court to get this sort of attention on the issue. But while we're on the issue of what we could sort of wrap up as toxic behaviour and incivility, I do want to give a quick plug to the summit that's coming up in October. The VLGA is a supporter of this Tackling Toxicity, Cultivating Civility event online globally. There's hundreds of people that have already registered to be part of this. It is going to be massive, and I do hope that all of you who share concerns about this issue can be part of it as well. The link to find out more is caelanacademy.com/summit. It's still a couple of months away, but as I say, the interest is massive, which just is a sign of how much of a problem this is in public life the world over, Julie and Tony. All right, another one that caught our eye this week, a story from the ABC about resourcing of the Local Government Inspectorate. The heart of this story was a long-running matter in Hepburnshire, which the Inspectorate has reportedly been investigating for about 5 years. Councillors and residents, they're frustrated that there's been no outcome to that. It's related to the handling of the Rex building project by Hepburnshire Council. And the MAV president, David Clark, has come out this week and called for more resourcing for the inspectorate. I think the suggestion here is the implication is that there's a lot of work in the pipeline and the inspectorate perhaps doesn't have the resourcing to be able to bring those matters to fruition as quickly as people would like. Tony?
Yeah, look, I think all of us involved in the sector would support more resources for the inspectorate. There's a lot of work for them to do in relation to managing both council laws and the operation of councils, integrity issues. But and this, as you say, this issue at Hepburnshire, it's a sad situation where 2019 was when the investigation commenced in mid-2019. Since then, of course, we've got a new CEO at Hepburnshire. We've got new senior officers and directors, new council laws. And as Brian Hood, the current mayor there at Hepburn, said, it's this extraordinary delay. It's problematic. If you don't move at a reasonable pace, then it dilutes the effectiveness of the process, is what Brian Hood said. And I think he's quite right. As David Clark said, MAV president, this long delay tends to defeat the purpose of, the integrity unit being effective. Now, I'm not sure if it's a resourcing issue or some other issue in there, but clearly, if I was a councillor, a ratepayer, or an officer at Hepburnshire, I'd be feeling pretty aggrieved at having to wait 5 years and more for an outcome in relation to that report.
Yeah.
And Chris, these situations are very complex, and there's lots of investigation required, and I can understand why it takes the time that it does. But I do agree. I think that I've been of the view for quite some time that the inspectorate has been under-resourced. And, because of the amount of detail and the amount of rigour that goes into all of these investigations, I think that, they do need to have the staff in there to be able to address it. And we know that we've had increase in behavioural issues. We know that we've had an increase across the board of numbers of complaints that have come in. So, but really with not much more increase in terms of resource. So look, I would agree that it needs to have some focus. I know that there's been talk about this for quite some time. So it is disappointing in a way that the government haven't addressed that resourcing issue that's so much needed in the inspectorate.
There's a few integrity issues in the news this week. I'm going to jump about the list here, Tony and Julie. Forgive me. I want to talk about Moonee Valley next, where the municipal monitors there have had their term extended. They were initially appointed for 6 months. I understand they prepared some interim advice for the minister, not a report at this stage, saying there was progress, but more work needed to be done, and obviously concerns about getting through this coming election period. So the minister's extended them through to February next year, which means it'll be about a 13-month appointment all up, and no report until the obviously February next year.
That's not unusual, Chris, that often they are appointed for a short period of time and then they get extended. So we've seen amounts of time like this is pretty typical, 12 months to get yourself, across what's going on, etc. So yeah, not surprising to me. I think that potentially that kind of term is expected, and also just getting them through and post the election period is will be a good idea, I believe.
And in light of what we were just talking about, the inspectorate, in this case at Moonee Valley, there's an IBAC matter on foot. This was referred to in the statement out of the government when they extended the term to cover that process, Tony, as well, with the extension of the monitor's term.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little disappointed, perhaps, for the voters in Moonee Valley that they're going to an election and without perhaps any information and look, if the report's not ready, it's not ready, and if the process at IBAC's not complete, well, we need to let it run its course. But I think that it would be nice for those voters to be in a position where they're perhaps considering whether they re-elect certain councillors, to know a bit more about what has occurred and any findings. But it looks like we're just going to have to wait to sometime in the new year in 2025 to learn the outcome of that process.
Yeah, it's been pointed out to me, slightly different process here than occurred at Yarra, which had a monitor term and a report, and then another term and a report. In this case, there will be no report until next year because it's an extension. While we're on IBAC, you might have noticed the announcement last week of the appointment of a new Chief Executive Officer of IBAC, Alison Byrne, who's coming from the CEO role at the County Court of Victoria. Not sure if you know Alison, either of you, Tony?
I don't know her, but very well qualified, previously at the New South Wales Crime Commission as well. And such a critical role IBAC plays, not just in local government, across, supporting integrity across the public sector. But we know that with reports like Operation Sandon into the Casey City Council, some years back we had Operation Royston, which was Ballarat. We've had investigations into procurement at local government. Performs a really important, critical role, IBAC, and great to see such a well-qualified person, Alison Byrne, appointed into that new role, as CEO.
I'm reminded too, just going back to that story about the inspectorate, one of David Clark's comments was more resourcing for the inspectorate might mean less matters being referred on to IBAC. I hadn't actually looked at it that way.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Okay, I know I'm jumping around, but monitors we've been talking about. We mentioned last week a councillor at Northern Grampians, Lauren Dempsey, had called for the appointment of a municipal monitor at her council. The council released a statement following on from that, basically saying there are processes to go through to deal with issues where councillors have concerns, and confirming that there was a process that I think has not yet been completed at Northern Grampians. And the minister, if you just bear with me here, has actually responded via the media on that call, and basically is not about to appoint a monitor. The minister said a monitor is only appointed to a council if there's a serious risk to council governance and integrity that is impacting on the council's ability to perform its functions, and that would generally follow a recommendation from the inspector or the ombudsman or IBAC. And Minister Horn also said that she applauded Councillor Dempsey for calling out poor behaviour, saying it's not easy to shift the culture of an organisation, but highlighting this type of behaviour can make a real difference. So pretty measured and balanced response there, Julie.
Yeah, definitely, and no commitments there, obviously. So not surprising in that response from the minister. It would end up being a bit of a watching brief, I think,
Yeah.
for the minister's advisors, just to be keeping an eye on what's going on there, and no doubt there'll be regular reports back on what they're hearing on the ground that's happening.
I agree. Not a surprise with that response. Tony, anything to add?
No, I mean it's one councillor's position. I'm not. I don't know the truth of it. And you'd expect for a monitor, I think, to step in. Um, as the minister says, dysfunction might be. We haven't been able to pass our budget. We're not able to conduct our meetings without there being constant disruption, etc. I think the minister's pointing to perhaps the fact that maybe there's not yet that sense of issues arising there, but there are avenues for individual councillors to take should they feel personally aggrieved with behaviours at councils, and so they should. And there are certain processes in place, as we well know, with the code of conduct. And looking forward to the new term, when I think we'll have perhaps some better processes, some stronger sanctions as well, to further encourage good behaviour.
The CEO at the City of Ballarat has got some media attention this week, defending a decision to edit the recording of a council meeting, apparently out of an abundance of caution, potential legal concerns over a councillor's comments about a power core development. A bit of a beat up, I think, Tony, because as Evan King says, the recording of the council meeting is not the legal the legal status of the meeting. It's the minutes document that provides that.
Yeah, and certainly the CEO has a discretion under the Ballarat policy, at least, in relation to the recording of council meetings, to not to publish parts of it if it's in the interests of councils, legally or reputationally. I see the competing interests here between the public's, right to know, viewing a recording, versus also the public interest in council not exposing themselves to a potential set of proceedings which the public would have to pay for. I'm okay with what's occurred at Ballarat. I think if it happens rarely, and I think it's a very rare occurrence, and there's a good basis for the CEO's decision here, I think.
I've never in my time had to do this, Julie. Have you?
No. I'm the same as you.
Yeah, often I know councillors are a bit frustrated that they don't have the parliamentary privilege that other parliamentarians have at other levels of government, and often it's important to remind councillors that that is not the case. Tony, have you come across that?
Yeah. Look. Councillors certainly don't share that that privilege that parliamentarians do, and I think there might be occasions where a councillor might, in hindsight, look back and realise that they've revealed some information that might, in a meeting, that might threaten someone's security, might expose the council to legal proceedings, proceedings in defamation, etc., and where it would be appropriate for to try and mitigate the risk here. And I think it seems, I don't know all the ins and outs here, but I think it seems that has been the motivation here, rather than to somehow make the council law look better. Yeah. And I think, provided the motivation of the CEO is to protect the interests of council in that sense, rather than, someone said something silly and they look silly, let's edit that out, that would be inappropriate.
That would be what would be called a slippery slope, I think. I do think that distinction's very, very important.
Yeah.
While we're on CEOs in the news, 2 appointments this week of note. A new permanent CEO announced at Golden Plains Shire. It's Shane Walden, who's coming from Macedon Rangers, where he's been the director there of assets for a little while. So congratulations to Shane, who's filling the shoes of two former CEOs, Michael Tudball, who's been there for 4 months, and Eric Brassless before that, who's moved on to Wyndham. So another new face in the ranks of council CEOs, Julie.
Yes, yes. No, it's good to see. Good to see some of the directors coming through and stepping into CEO roles. So particularly in that rural environment where it is so hard to get, people to step up into those positions that are more remote in Victoria. But yeah, no, Shane comes with a substantial amount of experience, as you say, over 20 years, and has a Master of Business Administration and a degree from the Australian Institute of Business. So I think he's going to be focusing on, a commitment to fiscal responsibility, efficient business processes, organisational integration to optimise customer experience is what they're saying. So, he's got a very, very clear vision for the council, and it's obviously impressed the council for them to appoint him.
Yes. Well done to
And,
Shane.
and
Tony?
another LG Pro XLP alumni. So, another plug for that program. A lot of senior executives in the sector have come through that and been better for it.
Absolutely right. And speaking of LG Pro, an LG Pro board member, and I know that's a distinction that you share, being a former board member, Julie.
Yes.
Sally Jones has been announced as the interim CEO at Central Goldfields, and Sally will be in that role for a little while because the council's not going to start the recruitment process, I understand, until after the elections. Sally's currently a general manager at the City of Kingston.
That's right, yeah. And look, she brings 24 years experience in local government, and she's been in executive roles and obviously, comes from that community strengthening sort of community background, which is fantastic. Yeah, she'll be appointed for 9 months, I believe, and then, they'll go through the rigorous process of appointing a CEO. Whether she runs for it, she may do. But great to see Sally progressing her career. She's a great operator, and good to see her heading up to Central Goldfields. What a nice place to reside for a while.
Oh, it is. It is. It's lovely, isn't it? So well done to Sally. Sally is, of course, stepping into the shoes being vacated by Lucy Roffey, who we reported recently had resigned and is headed to the city of Yarra in a director position to work there with Sue Wilkinson. So all the best to Lucy as well. A little bit of a news update that broke just after our program last week, Julie and Tony. Jim McGee, the former two-time mayor of Glen Ira, who announced with a little bit of fanfare a few months ago that he was hanging up his local government boots and looking to go off and do something else. He sent me a message late last week to say he'd reconsidered in the face of lots of encouragement from residents and family and friends. And he is going to go around again. He said he's still got the fire in the belly to take up that fight against cost shifting from other levels of government.
Oh, that's great news, Chris. I was surprised when he said he was going to hang up his boots because, he's had a very, very active few years in particular. I've been watching him and is very vocal out there in local government, defending local government. So good to see he's trying to hang on, and let's see what happens at the election, hey?
Yes, well, there's been a bit of a list building of current and former mayors saying they won't be standing, so we're going to have to strike Jim off that list. I noticed Claire Leserve at Bass Coast very recently was added to the list, announcing that she won't be standing again. But I spoke to Greg Box, Tony, this week on the Local Government News Roundup. If you haven't heard that interview, it's worth a listen. He made the point, which is a view that I've always had, take it with a grain of salt when councillors say that they're not re-standing, because right up until close of nominations, you just never know whether that itch is going to grab them and make them want to go around again.
I reckon it could be a tactic sometimes. Hey, I'm not standing, and last minute put the hand up. But look, some great experience, and Jim McGee, great example of, as Julie says, someone who's really working not just for the municipality and ratepayers, but for the sector overall, and a real strong advocate for the sector. And I think what we love for every council across the state is that there be a mix of, experienced councillors and new blood as well. That would be the ideal, I think, for most municipalities, and most council staff would say that would be a great situation as well.
We're going to head off to Rhys Thomas in just a moment. A bit of feedback has come in from our program last week where we talked about the move at Mornington Peninsula Shire to bring in open briefing sessions. I'm not sure whether you've heard much, Julie and Tony, but I have had a bit of feedback come through to me. I think it's fair to say some veterans in the sector are a bit nervous about this, but recognising, as we said last week, that it's probably coming, and the trick here is going to be in how it's managed appropriately with the right level of policy behind it. Also, a bit of a call for some leadership from Local Government Victoria here, or something from the Minister to say, what the government feels about this move towards open briefings, because the legislation, of course, Tony's pretty silent on it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think absolutely filling that void and some guidance would be helpful. It's not just Mornington Peninsula. Let me tell you, there's some notices of motion at least one council seeking to basically follow the position and perhaps even a bit more pointedly say that as of the next council meeting,
wow,
this occurs. So there's that will come out. We'll see that in weeks to come. But so I think that we'll see attempts to implement this in various councils across Victoria. But I think that we're grappling with, if it is to be implemented, as you say, what are the protocols? What are the guiding lines here that we need to follow to make sure that this is implemented in a way that is not highly disruptive to the necessary provision of good, candid, accurate advice to councillors, so that when they do make those decisions, they are well informed and able to, handle that democratic role in the best of ways.
Julie, any feedback from you since last week?
No, I haven't heard anything. So, but I would imagine, I'm not surprised to hear what you've said, Chris, in that you will have different schools of thought. Some of the people that have worked behind the scenes for so long will be a little bit nervous about, opening things up, what that means for them, and the way that things should operate. But like you said, we are moving into this space naturally. The expectation of our communities is that we are transparent, and so that's coming through messages very loud and clear.
All right, let's take a break and head off to the VLGA studio and bring in this week's segment with Rhys Thomas. Bringing in Rhys Thomas now in the VLGA studio for his regular chat. I look forward to these chats, Rhys, because I learn something every week, and this week I know you've got some pearlers of wisdom here. How are you?
I'm good, Chris. It's good to be here.
Just realised I said pearlers of wisdom. How Australian is that? You've got another Olympic story for us today too, for us to look forward to?
I do. We'll put a pin in that, because I'm going to talk first about election signage, because the panel mentioned it last week.
Oh, I did say I'll bet we'll be talking about signage. I didn't think it'd be this soon, but there you go.
Well,
what do you want to tell us?
I'll tell you what the rules are, but I bet you it won't be the last word before the election campaign's out.
Yes.
But I'll start with signs on private land, because the definitive position here comes from a case called Badger versus Bayside City Council.
Oh, yes. Remember it well. It's not that long ago.
No, it wasn't. It followed the 2022 federal election campaign, where Bayside City Council sought to have some election signs for the Zoe Daniels, who was the candidate for Goldstein, sought to have them removed under the Planning and Environment Act. So I'll put my town planner hat on for a minute and just talk about the rules, because there's a particular exemption, which is that in most zones in Victoria, certainly all residential zones, putting up a sign requires a planning permit unless there's a specific exemption. Now, there is a specific exemption that applies to a sign that publicises a local political event, which includes information about an election candidate. Now, that exemption applies if all of these things are true. if the sign is less than 5 square metres in size, if it's the only sign displayed on the land, if it's not animated or internally illuminated, and if it's not up for longer than 3 months, or it's removed 14 days after the election, whichever of those is earlier.
Right.
So in Badger versus Bayside, it's called Badger because Mr. Badger was the campaign manager for Zoe Daniels. Bayside directed the removal of some election signage on the basis that they didn't feel that that planning exemption applied. They were of the view that the exemption couldn't apply because the federal election at that point hadn't been officially called, meaning that there was no political event to advertise. They also held the view that because there wasn't an actual date for the election, then the exemption couldn't apply because that date might be more than 3 months away. And in a separate argument, they argued that the requirement that only one sign be displayed should be interpreted to mean that only one sign can be displayed at each election, meaning that taking down one sign and replacing it with another one would be prohibited. Now, the court disagreed with all of those arguments and found that the corflute signs were exempt and should be allowed to remain. So as a result of that decision, councils have a pretty clear understanding now of the application of the Planning and Environment Act. And in fact, many of them publish specific guidelines for candidates. And so I've been having a look at some of those guidelines.
So to summarise, Bayside didn't have a single win in those arguments, but it's helped the rest of the sector understand the parameters.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think Bayside themselves were of the view that it was necessary to get a definitive position on it because the interpretation was somewhat unclear. Because there is one common misconception that still exists, and in fact it exists in some of the council's guidance material, which is that signs can't be erected more than 3 months before the election. A number of councils say that. Now, given that the council election is less than 3 months away, it doesn't really matter now, but that interpretation is not correct. The court actually looked at it in detail and said that if that had been the intention of the drafters of the planning scheme, there's nothing that could have stopped them from writing it that way. What the actual exemption means is that you can put the sign up at any time as long as it's not up for longer than 3 months. So if you want to put it up 6 months before the election and remove it 3 months before the election, you can do that.
But you couldn't replace it with another and therefore have constant coverage for a longer period of time?
You can. And that's Bayside felt that that was a silly interpretation, but the court found that that's actually the wording of the scheme. So that's exactly what you can do. Now that only applies to signs that are relying on this planning scheme exemption. So if it's a sign that has a planning permit, might be a big electronic billboard or something, then it's the conditions that planning permit that apply. So none of those other rules apply. Now, rules on council land are a bit trickier to explain because every municipality has different rules because it's in their local laws that they're controlled. So most councils prohibit the erection of signage on council land, places like parks and reserves and council buildings, car parks, footpaths, those places. But councils do often have provisions that allow temporary signage associated with election campaign activity, things like pop-up information stalls or meet the candidate sessions. Now, there may be permit or public liability insurance obligations to do that, but even some councils waive those requirements or actually issue the permits or even the insurance coverage at no cost. So anyone thinking of putting up a campaign sign on council land should be talking to their council about the requirements for that. And there's a few other loose ends to tie up. Signage on moving vehicles is not restricted by councils, although some councils do have local laws that extend restrictions to parked vehicles or mobile billboards. Signage on roadsides is governed by the Road Management Act, which requires written consent from the road authority, which is usually the council. And some councils will grant permission for signs to be erected on roadsides, particularly if they wouldn't be visible from the property. They're typically rural councils. Signs on walls, fences, poles, bus stops, trees, sort of bill posting type signs, they're not permitted, and that's a breach of the Summary Offences Act, punishable by a fine of up to $3,000 or even imprisonment, plus the cost of remediation. Now, councils can and do undertake prosecution for unauthorised bill posting, so I certainly wouldn't be advising doing that. And the last one is erection of signage in a state forest. If you happen to be in one of our rural areas, if you put a sign on a tree or put stakes in the ground, that's considered work under the forestry recreations regulations. And again, if you do that without a permit, then it's a significant fine. In that case, $2,000.
Gosh, it's a vexed space, isn't it? Someone needs to do, if you haven't already, Reece, a handy flow chart here. And it seems to start with, is it private land? Is it council land? Is it other public land? And you go down the chart from there.
It is very complicated, and I think someone would do a flow chart if it weren't for the fact that every council has different rules. It does make it very complicated. But most councils will have people that you can talk to who understand all of this. So that's where people should be reaching out.
What about that other issue that comes up every election? People, for whatever reason, are always a bit confused about what needs authorising and how do you do that?
Yeah, well, that one's getting clearer over time. And in fact, the Victorian Electoral Commission issues some pretty good guidance in their candidate handbook about authorisation. So authorisation is required on all sorts of things, publications and social media and other things. But I'll just talk about signs today, which is that every one of those signs that I've talked about needs to have an authorisation message, but not just an election sign. So if you've got a sign that relates to an issue that might be considered at the election. So let's say you've got a sign that says "Save our swimming pool" or "We oppose inappropriate development." You've got one of those in your front yard, then that needs to be authorised, even if it's been up there for quite some time already. So that authorisation message needs to contain the name of the authorising person and a street or postal address. So not a email address or an online address. And as for the actual size of there's no font size rule, but essentially the authorisation message needs to be legible to someone who's reading the rest of the sign. So if the sign is designed to be read from the other side of the road, then the authorisation needs to be big enough and clear enough to be read from there as well. And that
So you can't stick it around the back. You can't put it in tiny little print at the bottom or put it on the reverse of the sign. Or
no, you can't do that. It's got to be pretty clear. It can be at the bottom. It doesn't have to be as big as the rest of the text, but it certainly has to be legible.
Yeah.
And it applies at all times. We're not waiting for the election period to start. If you've got to sign up now, then the authorisation message needs to be up now.
Good advice there. And I think you're going to compile all of this into some information that will be going out to members soon, Reece. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll do something about it and send it out in an updated newsletter.
Just before I ask you about your Olympic story, I noticed also this week that the Local Government Inspectorate has put out a timeline of process, or is it the VEC? I forget which one, a timeline of process for eligible candidates. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that yet. I'll look out for it. I think it would probably be the VEC. So the VEC's information is pretty good. Their website's pretty good, and there's one for every individual council. So certainly anyone standing for council should be using that as a sort of single source of truth.
Yeah, I've double checked it. It is the Local Government Inspectorate that's put out a new fact sheet, timeline of process for eligible candidates to support new and returning councillors in the lead up to the elections. So one to check out there, Reece.
I might talk about that next week. Who knows?
It sounds like it will be worth taking a look at. So you've got another Olympic fact for us that intersects with local government.
And it's got a local government flavour. So you need to picture yourself as a Melbourne teenager in 1956 at a Sydney university.
That's hard for me to do, but anyway.
in protest at the Olympic torch relay, and perhaps with a touch of Melbourne-Sydney rivalry, you and a few mates set about to share your grievances on the world stage and embarrass the Sydney Lord Mayor as a bonus. So I'm talking about Barry Larkin, who by chance was friends with one of the torch relay organisers. And armed with a little bit of inside information, he took a wooden table leg, attached an empty plum pudding can to the top of it, and painted the whole thing silver. And along with his accomplices, they stuffed a pair of kerosene-soaked underpants inside, set them alight, and stepped out of a 30,000-strong crowd into the path of the torch relay. Now, being mistaken for the official torch relay and armed and with a full police escort, Barry then climbed the stairs of the Sydney Town Hall and presented the fake torch to Pat Hills, the Lord Mayor of Sydney. Now, Councillor Hills commenced his speech, all the while holding the flaming undies aloft as Barry Larkin slinked back into the crowd. So chalk that one up for a victory of Melbourne over Sydney, I say.
Oh, what a great story. And you know what I notice, because this is the way my brain works, Larkin is only a couple of letters off the word larrikin.
Well, there you go. That's a distinct Australian flavour.
Absolutely. Anything else to share before we wrap this up, Reece?
Oh, just to say that the state government is preparing to release its consultation paper on the Model Councillor Code of Conduct, which will include the mandatory induction and professional development requirements for mayors, deputy mayors and councillors. So we're expecting that discussion paper next week, so everyone should look out for that. And I think there's about a 4-week consultation window planned.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's available in enough time for me to unpack that a little bit for us next week.
Excellent. All right. Next week, the Olympics will still be going. Do you think you'll have anything more up your sleeve of that nature, Reece?
I've got one more.
One more. Excellent. Look forward to that. Thank you. We should have mentioned this week's segment is called Time to Re-Sign.
Which means if you've had a sign that's about to run out to its 3-month timeline, it's time to pull it down and put it up with a different one.
Love it. Thank you, Reece. Reece Thomas, as always, very insightful, and we'll see you again next week here on TGU.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh,
As always, Reece just gives you something to think about, Julie.
oh, doesn't he, Chris? And look, interesting, this whole signs issue. It's on the thoughts and minds of many councils at the moment. And I remember when I was, the CEO at a council, that that was a big issue during that time about election signs and what you can take down and what you can't take down, and how you manage all of that, because it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Every council, I think, particularly metro councils, dealing with that every 4 years. Tony, how did Reece score on your legal chart for the explanation of all those signage rules?
Oh, he's done really well. I thought that was a great sort of a collection of information, really handy for candidates. I would love to have had something like that when I was a councillor, but it gave me flashbacks of painting my name on these door signs that I got at a builder's junkyard, and borrowing my dad's star pickets and putting them up. Every mate who I knew in Diamond Creek got a phone call and ended up with my name on their front yard, but I'm not sure if it helped or not.
Well, you got elected, so something
must have done something.
Something worked, yes. And for those who don't know, eventually, the youngest mayor at the time of Nillumbik, I think that honour's been.
It was at the time. I think that's long been passed by others. Yeah.
Yeah. You've been trumped since then. All right. Probably shouldn't use that word, trumped. Anyway, let's have a look at the rest of the news that we thought might be worth noting briefly. A small sites pilot project has been announced. 4 suburbs in Melbourne to be targeted here. This is about getting more affordable housing built. I think, Tony, you noticed this one in the press.
Yeah. So it's sites that are surplus government land to be sold to the private sector through a expression of interest campaign. They're in Preston, Coburg, Alphington and Malvern, and the bidders are required to set aside 10% of the project for affordable housing, and that's a process the EOI I think started now, or certainly closes at the end of August. It's interesting because it's on the back of also some data that's been released by Yimby Melbourne, yes, in my backyard Melbourne, and their analysis, at least, of data is suggesting that councils are more likely to grant those permits for single dwellings or very large, tall buildings, large developments of 200 dwellings or more than they are for this kind of middle group of 6 to 50 type dwellings. So these sites are certainly of a size that would fall within that medium density housing, sort of up to 20 dwellings situation. So look, I think it's a good move by the government. We need many more than 4 of such sites released, but it will certainly go some way towards providing affordable housing and other housing solutions in those 4 suburbs of Melbourne. And we'll watch this one and see just how it plays out, how quickly we can see works on the ground, and how that 10% affordable housing component works out as well.
And it was interesting also, Chris, that it was land that's either owned by the Department of Health or Development Victoria or VicTrack or Department of Transport and Planning. So they are targeting their own sites that are obviously underutilised at the moment for building these pilot medium density homes. So interestingly, that they're now looking at their sites and saying, well, how can we leverage on the existing sites that we've got, which is great. So I think it'll be interesting to watch this one. It'll be interesting to watch how much they engage with the community on this one, whether or not how much of a say that the councils have in these. I suspect that there's not going to be much say, but putting forward designs and how they engage the local communities will be an interesting one to keep an eye on, I think.
It's not that far back that we have to go to find the government's approach of surplus land was trying to sell it for highest and best use, and councils were, having to bid significant amounts of money if they wanted to grab those pieces of land for public use. I wonder how many of those the government sort of wishes now that they had held back for housing purposes, given the crisis we have.
Yes, the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah. The former Chief Commissioner of the City of Melbourne, and I lead with that for the local government angle, but also former Olympian and IOC Vice President Kevin Gosper, passed away at the age of 90 just before the start of the Olympics. I think that's worth noting given the contribution he made to public life, including to local government.
Yeah, very well-known name, eh? Yeah, 90 years of age, and 1956 Olympics. He was a silver medalist. I didn't know that, to be honest. I looked that up, and won a gold medal in they say the Commonwealth Games in '54. I think it might have been called, was it the British Empire Games or something like that? Yes,
wow.
But he was very significant in Melbourne circles, also as a Chief Commissioner, as you say, at Melbourne City Council. Huge contribution. I think his family have, in honour of Kevin, have gone across to the Olympics in Paris this year. Lovely.
Yeah.
Valet Kevin Gosper. A story that got some attention this week out of Perth, where a man allegedly went on a rampage and smashed 63 windows at the offices of the City of Vincent in Leederville. Details have emerged about this gentleman who's been released on bail after appearing in court this week. His name is Damien John Wright. Apparently at the centre of this is the seizing and euthanisation of a dog. Pretty emotive issue at the best of times.
Yeah, this kind of issue is always going to be very emotive, but doesn't mean that he has the right to go and smash public property as a result of it. But I believe it was 63 windows at the City of Vincent.
Could you imagine coming to work at a council office and finding all of those windows smashed in that way?
Yeah. So a dispute.
And $120,000 worth of damage. So, it's as Julie says, people get very emotional about their pets and dogs. This gentleman's pleading not guilty, we've got to say. So we're not saying that he's certainly been arrested and charged, but it certainly it can be a very emotive issue when councils have such an impact on people's lives, and rightly so. And this is an area that's really difficult for council staff, because we need the local laws team involved in policing the behaviour of our pets, but it's also fraught with emotions and potentially, it looks like in this case, could well have spilled over.
Yes, so more to come on that one. In New South Wales, it is, I think this is fairly unique to New South Wales, it's Local Government Week this week, and lots of councils are doing things to highlight the services that they provide to the community. I see Leeton Shire, for example, which is not too far from us is doing free microchipping as part of Local Government Week. There's been some awards held this week. There was a dinner, I think, last night at the Four Seasons Hotel in Sydney where those Local Government Week award winners were announced. This is a nice idea to raise the profile,
Oh,
Julie.
it's such a nice idea, Chris, and I don't know why we don't have it in all states. We should have it in all states, but they're saying that the week aims to help move the conversation beyond roads, rates, and rubbish. We've spoken about this before, to the important and far-reaching role that councils play as hubs of their community. And, you know, as we know, the sector's responsible for everything and anything, just about pools, parks, playgrounds, libraries, local festivals, lighting, etc., etc. So it's really just a bit about raising awareness in the community, getting councils to engage with their local communities and celebrate what local government has to offer. So I think it's great. I think it's terrific, and I think that, you know, when you've got a sector that is so big and that has a huge impact on the economy across, you know, any state, why not have a week dedicated to showcasing what it offers?
Yeah. It reminds me of a time in Hobson's Bay when we ran the 100 services in 100 days campaign, and it was a struggle to narrow it down to 100 discrete services because really there were quite a few more when you start to think about it, the things that councils do for their community. So I agree, Julie, nice opportunity to celebrate that.
Yeah.
We've talked often too on the program about this grey area of councillors, members of staff, workplace laws, OHS responsibilities that CEOs have to staff, not necessarily extending to councillors because of their status. In Tasmania, it's an issue, and one council, Burnie, is calling for that to be dealt with. They want to change to the legislation, Tony.
Yeah, so it's about workers' compensation laws there and allowing councillors to be insured for what's termed psychosocial harm suffered in performing their role, things like workplace bullying, trauma from difficult events, excess workloads, low job control, etc. Look, interesting one. I'm not convinced that the community will really want to see a lot of, you know, councillors seeking compensation for some of these things. I think part of standing for office is it's, you know, there's a high workload, but you know, there's necessary sacrifices that councillors make, but will be interesting to see what occurs, because I think if there's a more protective regime available in Tasmania, it won't be long before we see other states looking to implement that as well.
Absolutely. All right, we'll keep an eye on that. I've got a couple of overseas stories to quickly run by you and get your reaction to. We've talked about Birmingham City Council a few times. It's in deep financial trouble, and it looks like it's going to be some time before they work their way out of that. There's been some numbers released this week on the cost of having to do their bookkeeping manually because of the huge software project that's fallen over there. The software project has cost £38 million and is not working, and it's cost them £1 million to do their bookkeeping manually. 40,000 man hours, Julie, have been required.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, Chris, and what a blow for the council, that the fact that this software has not worked. They've had these difficulties and they've had to, you know, basically come in and do everything manually. I mean, it is just, you know, a disaster for them, really, isn't it? Having to have 40,000 hours of manual handling of
can you imagine
data. Oh gosh,
the finance people in our audience will be cringing just at the thought.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see whether they take any legal action against the software company and, you know, on its failure to deliver what is, you know, meant to be a significant software benefit to the council. So, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of scrutiny on Birmingham over this. But equally, you know, they would be no doubt having some serious discussions with the software company.
Tony, on your intrepid travels around Europe recently, did you happen to get to the Greek Isles?
Not this time, but I have been to Santorini, and I
Have
know what
you?
you're referring to. And
Yes.
maybe I contributed to some of this over tourism that the mayor Nikos Zorzos is complaining about, and he wants to reinstate a previous daily limit to tourist numbers.
Yeah,
Apparently there are
particularly cruise ship numbers. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. 15,500 permanent residents on the island of Santorini, and they can get up to 11,000 tourist visits from those cruise ships a day. So,
Wow.
coming close to doubling the population. We're seeing this across Europe at the moment. Barcelona,
Yeah.
Venezia, Dubrovnik, these sort of places that are big tourist meccas. The local communities, the local councils are sort of fighting back, but it's a double-edged sword for them because their economy is very reliant on tourism as well. But imagine if you went to your local Woolworths or your local town square and it's just, there's nowhere to sit. It's covered
Yeah.
in tourists, and it's like that, virtually for a place like Santorini, virtually, 365 days a year.
So what drew this to my attention was a council official there overstepped when they had that particularly big day of 15,000 cruise ship visitors, put out a message on social media asking locals to stay at home, stay indoors and stay out of the way. It was like an unofficial lockdown. The locals did not take to that kindly at all, and some outrage very quickly built, Julie.
Yes, I'd imagine it would actually, Chris, because it was, it's taking away their rights almost, to get out. I don't know. People are going to choose whether they interact with tourists or not. They probably see the economic benefits that are brought to Santorini, through tourists coming in. But yeah, that's a bit of an extreme response, I think.
I'd love to
lock
see
people down.
Santorini and the Greek Isles, but now I'm thinking about whether I want to contribute to that over tourism problem. We'll have to try and pick a quiet day.
I'm not too sure whether I fancy getting off a ship of 15,000 people.
No. All right, and perhaps one final one. I thought this was interesting. There was a case where an art historian was perusing social media posts and apparently not for the first time spotted a missing portrait. This is a portrait of Henry VIII that was done back in the 1590s, and obviously the establishment had lost track of where that portrait was, but this guy spotted it hanging on the wall of a shire hall in, I think it was Warwickshire, Julie.
Yes, it was actually, and it's a cracking photo. You can see it in the background, and obviously this historian has got really, really excited about this missing painting that is obviously, like you said, from the 1500s. So and it just goes to show that there are some benefits, Chris, to social media, and and this is in Warwickshire County Council, and it's become a really big deal now, recognising this important painting that's been missing for some time. But yeah, no, the historian does say, that social media has unlocked for him some opportunities to find things that, that have gone missing in the past. So it's great, and it's a cracking picture. So yeah.
So that portrait's no longer on the wall of the Shire Hall. It's been removed to a museum centre where it's being analysed. It's probably worth a good deal of money.
Yes, that's right. So yeah,
probably up their insurance policy too.
Yeah.
Premiums have gone up for the council. Hopefully they're self-insuring, but yeah.
Reminds me of the time some eagle eyes spotted a portrait of Tony Rownick on the mayoral gallery in the background of a social media photo not that long back.
It's $1.50 at the jumble sale, yeah.
All right, that's our lot, I think, for this week. Julie and Tony, thank you as always. Lots happening, as we say, never a dull moment in local government.
Never a dull moment.
Tony, you're off to the RCV event today. Good luck with that.
Yeah, wander inside and get to hear from some state government politicians and various speakers should be good. And I'll put a report up on LinkedIn. But we look forward to that. And congrats to Mary Ann Brown, the president of RCV. Southern Grampians Shire councillor, and been a real force for RCV and their prominent organisation in the sector.
Thanks very much for dialing in literally from your car on your iPhone. The wonders of technology. You can be anywhere and still be part of TGU.
That's right.
Unless you're in Tuscany, apparently.
Yeah.
Right.
And I believe, Chris, there's a regional cities event coming up in a few weeks' time as well. So the rural and regional councils are doing a great job at the moment of being able to bring the sector together and to talk about, hot issues and solutions going forward to some of those challenges that they're facing. So it's great to see.
Great stuff. All right. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Tony. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next week for TGU, sponsored by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers and brought to you by VLGA Connect. You can watch on YouTube. Don't forget there's a podcast version as well that you can listen to at your leisure on your preferred podcast player. Until next time, bye for now.